And I would like to welcome all of you to the second day, day two of the Cybersecurity CEPS Summit. This is the third edition of this event, and yesterday we had a great start with great participation from people. We had the opening session with three great speakers. In particular, was to emphasize the contribution from Raji, somebody from McAfee that mentioned, the need to have cybersecurity as a collective responsibility. In other words, everybody can do something, for cybersecurity to avoid that the new normal becomes that like a hospital can be hacked, And then we had a two-bit session on the NIS review. Also, a new issue is coming up also in the policy making of the European Commission, cybersecurity for ICT products. Today, we will complete our summit and we'll have the opening session with two great speakers. Robert Dean is the Attaché for Information Society and Telecommunication, the permanent representation of Germany to the EU. And then Jérôme Billois, partner in cybersecurity and digital trust at Wavestone. Today, we will focus probably more on more forward-looking issues. Indeed, we'll have two great sections on artificial intelligence cybersecurity, our way towards enhancing the synergies, and also a session on one of the most critical issue at the moment for the policy of the European Commission, the policy making, the global data governance and digital sovereignty. I think they both, the speaker that this morning will open this session will make reference to these issues. So I would like to give the floor to Robert Dean to open this session. Robert, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much.
Just a second. Also, just some engagement rule. I want to make clear that the event is on the record. It will be live streamed also on YouTube. And then all the attendees can, pose question to the speaker using the chat. Okay, thank you very much. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much, Lorenzo, and thanks also for inviting me to this great event. It's a great honor to be the first speaker today. I have to say that I'm not responsible for cybersecurity here at the Perm Rep. To avoid any misunderstandings and any bad feelings with my colleagues that are actually responsible for cybersecurity. But I am responsible for the telecoms working party, and I have to say, when I look at the agenda for today, for the second day of your summit, these are really the topics that we are currently working on in our still ongoing presidency. So AI, data governance, and most notably as a frame basically for all of that, the digital sovereignty. Or maybe I'm still kind of the right person, at least from the side of the German permit for today, hopefully. Let me make a couple of comments on digital sovereignty. When we started our presidency, we kind of chose this topic as kind of our overarching priority in a way, and our idea. And just one technical thing. I think, Jerome, your mic is not on mute, or someone has still his mic on, and I hear some.
Yes, I would suggest to mute. I'll mute mine too, but probably Caroline.
Okay, now it's better. When we started, we chose this digital sovereignty as like the overarching topic for our presidency, and our idea was also because this concept is discussed already for a couple of years, and even in different terms. Some use different terms to describe basically, I think, the same thing. You hear sometimes autonomy or sometimes even autarky or something like that. So we thought we will use our presidency to reconcile a bit the views that are here among member states on this issue, because it's also a quite intensively debated thing. And we had in mind to have like this kind of general debate on the topic. But at the time, of course, we were already in the corona pandemic, but we thought that it would be over quite soon and we could get back to normal business in a way and have a great ministers meeting in Baden-Baden in October. But yeah, we were a bit wrong there. And so basically everything had to be cut down a bit to the essence, to the really essential stuff. And we also couldn't do our meeting in Baden-Baden. We had to do it online, like this event today that was probably also planned at some point to be a physical event. So for our general debate on digital sovereignty, that meant that we actually didn't really have it. But what we had, in fact, was some very concrete examples and realizations of this famous digital sovereignty, that also led to some quite substantial debates. The most recent one is the debate on the Data Governance Act. There was a debate just ahead of its publication around data localization requirements. I'm really sorry, my phone is now ringing. I hope it doesn't disturb the audio. The debate was basically about if we need to create strong requirements to process some kind of data within the EU, or if it's enough basically to set more general rules, or even if it's in line with the ambitions that the EU follows in the WTO and other trade negotiations, to have this kind of strict rules. And this is exactly one concrete example of what it can mean or not, the digital sovereignty. It's exactly this question. How do we tackle these problems that we, on the one hand, of course, want to stay open, and we of course want to promote the free flow of data, not only within the EU, but of course also with third countries, because I mean, we have so many companies, maybe companies that are originally based in the EU and that are basically our companies, but also companies that are originally based elsewhere and that are kind of also our companies because they contribute to our welfare here in the same way, basically. And for these, it's of course open. It's of course important to enable these kind of free data flows across the globe in a way. But on the other hand, the data that flows has to meet, of course, some rules. And if we talk, for example, about personal data, these rules are quite elaborated. And we can also not make any concession here in a way. And the same is basically true for IP. I mean, we have to basically protect data that has some IP or that has some connections to intellectual property. So we have to find basically a way to reconcile these two aims, enabling free flow of data, but also staying to our rules and making our rules effective, not only for processes that are happening here within the EU, but for data flows that touch the EU and that go across the globe. The Commission now presented the Data Governance Act that tries to find this balance. I mean, we had now a chance to look at it only once, so only a bit superficially. But that will be basically the thing that we will do in the next weeks and months, also under the Portuguese presidency, to really analyze and discuss and negotiate where this balance could lie in this very specific issue of the data flows. And here we're talking about mainly about data that is held by public bodies, and that is in a way sensitive in that way that it, for example, is personal data or IP relevant data that is concerned. Another example where we had similar discussions and a very concrete realization of what it means to be digitally sovereign was the cloud declaration that we made. It's pretty much the same in a way, or pretty similar, I would say. We had in Germany a project together with France, the Gaia X, that is of course still ongoing, and that is now in a way an integral part of the EU endeavor to create a federated EU cloud ecosystem. And here it was basically the same question: how to stay open on the one hand, for example, open for cloud providers from elsewhere that, as we all know, are responsible for a very large part of the market and that are also in a way leading in many technological areas here. But on the other hand, we of course wanted to promote our own providers, and we also saw the issues in a way with this cloud market being basically dominated by a quite small number of enterprises that are all originally not based in the EU. And then the third thing, how to make sure that the data that is processed on these clouds really is processed according to our rules. I think this discussion is still ongoing. In principle, I think everyone is on the same line here, more or less, that these rules have to be defined in a clear way. And participants of a cloud ecosystem, as described as Gaia X, have to basically commit to these rules. How that looks in practical terms, don't ask me. You have to ask really the people that are dealing every day in like forming and defining Gaia X, for example, and making it really reality. But it's probably not so easy in a way. All this shows, I would say, that maybe this general debate about digital sovereignty is not needed anymore. What is really needed is to tackle the problems that we have at hand, and there are quite some, or I wouldn't even say problems, it's more challenges probably. And to really work like day-to-day work and try to solve it and bring Europe really here on the right track. Another example where we try to do that is currently a member states or ministers declaration on microelectronics that we're preparing together with the Commission at the moment. And that also aims at basically promoting this industry that has certainly a strategic value in a way that you can absolutely compare with AI, I would say. I mean, there is a lot of talks about AI, which is maybe more like the software part, and sometimes the hardware part is a bit left out this discussion. But it's clear that you can't win with only the software, I would say. So that's another example where we try to bring things forward in a way. My general feeling is that in the EU, the topic of digitalization has really arrived in the minds of almost every policy maker, regardless of the remit, regardless of the area, be it environment, be it energy, transport, you name it. So I think we are on a really good way here. We have also some opportunities with the new budget framework that will hopefully very soon be in place in its totality. I'm talking here about the Digital Europe program that we hope to still close under our presidency. And I'm talking also about the Resilience and Recovery Facility that has chosen digitization as one of the major priority topics. So things are on the right track, I would say, but of course, if you look at some statistics, Europe has really to work hard still, but hopefully in a good spirit. And yeah, that's basically my contribution to this first part of the second day of your cybersecurity summit.
Okay, thank you very much, Robert. I think that you made a very good point when you mentioned, the fact that we should move maybe from an ideological approach to, to this issue of digital sovereignty, to look more at the concrete challenge, not how we can implement, this policy, both on the cloud and also on the Data Act. I don't know if there are any reaction or question from maybe Jerome or other people that are in the audience. Well, if I may, just an additional comment. I want to ask Robert. I mean, how do you think that this prospect that you have outlined can change, with the new U.S. administration? In other words, there was an article from on the Economist this week called "The New Grand Bargain." It was mentioned the need, for the U.S. and the EU to join forces to some extent to manage the autocratic technosphere of China. So is this the new policy that maybe the EU, the US administration will put in place can be an help in this direction?
Yes, I think absolutely it can be a great opportunity in one way, because we absolutely share the same core values with our American partners, and we should, in my point of view, never forget that. We should really try to seek the cooperation and try to make the cooperation and partnership happen with the US. I think there is really no way around it. I mean, if you look at who is leading, who is leading in many digital areas today. On the other hand, of course, it will not be any yeah, it will not be easy. I mean, I was in Washington at the German embassy when the talks about the TTIP were still ongoing, and that was still the Obama administration. And I can tell you that it was not easy at all. These talks, they were tough and they were really difficult. At the same time, there were the talks about the privacy shield that were not really directly connected to TTIP, but it was negotiated basically at the same time. It was not easy at all, and it will not be easy at all today. But I think we really have to try to get things going. I mean, data flows, it's basically at the moment an unsolved problem in a way. After the Schrems decision. So I think there has to be a good cooperation and tough negotiations with the US, but also with the aim in mind to really work together as closely as possible. That's my personal view, I have to say. And I think that the new administration can be of help here. But we shouldn't be naive and think that everything will go very smoothly and very easily. Because the Americans, they know exactly what they want, and they know exactly how far they can and want to go. And we do the same, of course.
Okay, thank you very much. So now we'll give the floor to Jérôme Billois, partner in Cybersecurity and Digital Trust from Wavestone. Jérôme, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Lorenzo. Thanks for having me today. I'm going to share a few slides that I prepared for this morning. I will share my full screen so it will be okay. I hope that everyone sees the slides. So today I'm going to talk about a different point of view of maybe Robert told this morning. I will talk especially about the situation in very large enterprises, very large corporations that deals with cybersecurity on a daily basis. And my talk will be mostly about what we call the double-edged sword challenges between on the cybersecurity topic between innovation and regulation. So just as an introductory word, as Lorenzo said, I'm part of Wavestone. You hear my Twitter account if you want to discuss with me afterwards. Wavestone, we're a consultancy based in 14 countries, mostly in Europe, French roots, 3,000 people and 600 dedicated on cyber. And what I'm going to discuss this morning is mainly the feedback of what we see in the field, in very large companies that we worked with, and especially the feedback from our CERT, our Computer Emergency Response Team, regarding the main challenges we see. We managed more than 60 large incidents last year. So I think there are quite a few thoughts that are very interesting to share with you about that. When we talk about cybersecurity and the need for policy and how to make things move, I think the first angle we should take is to discuss about the threats. The threats, you know, there have multiple forms. What we see right now in the field is that the ransomware is the #1 threat and will remain, at least for 2-3 years, this #1 threat. Ransomware, it started a long time ago, 2010, starting blocking computers of individuals. Then it switched to small enterprises. Then in 2018, we saw the start of what we call the big game hunting, cyber criminals targeting very large enterprises with a manual hands-on approach for the attack. Since that, we have witnessed last year the arrival in Europe of this combined attack from the cyber criminal. On one hand, blocking the information system, and on the other hand, stealing some data and asking for ransom not to reveal it to the general public. We envision that for next year and the years after, there will be two main drivers to these threats. The first one, and I think that's the worst one, these attacks are very profitable. When we calculate the return on investment, we are around 500, 600%. So cyber criminals, they make millions today. And they spend it for sure. You can see the picture they share of their daily life for sure, but they also invest. And they have now the means of doing very advanced attacks. And that is a change since last year, when these advanced attacks were more the work of state agencies. And on the second hand, we are seeing more and more new ways to ensure the payment of the ransom, making the attack very public. Maybe you've seen the cyber criminal groups that bought some Facebook ads to make public the attack, or even the group in Finland that it was a health institution that were attacked, and the personal health data of the people were stolen, and the attackers asked the patient to pay for their own data not to be revealed, because the health institution didn't want it to pay globally. So they are very, very, very clever at making companies pay. So I think that's really what we need to have in mind. And the two other trends that I think will increase in the coming years, and where policy should work also, are the provider hacking. So cyber criminals going not directly at their target, but going through the third-party providers used by all these companies, whether they are, I would say, classic providers, maybe HR providers, marketing providers, suppliers of goods, and so on, but especially all the IT providers. They have been the target of attacks, and they are now one of the channel envisioned by the cybercriminal to enter into the information system of large companies. The main information systems are more and more secured. There has been improvement on that, but we are seeing that cybercriminals are going more and more through the provider channel. And last but not least, the topic of the cloud. I will speak a little bit about that after, but cloud is very secure at the infrastructure level, or at least it's very well managed regarding security at the infrastructure level, but you have to plug application within the cloud, and there is the joint between this infrastructure and the application, where there are many, many new ways of attacking the systems, and cyber criminals are looking more and more at it. So if we look at the cybercrime, we have a rapidly growing ecosystem, and that poses a real challenge, I think, at the policy-making level. If I take a few concrete examples, we are seeing very important profits for the cyber criminals. I spoke about the return on investment. You have here a few prices on the dark market. So maybe on the policy angle, we should really focus on attacking this attack profitability, making the money laundering ever more tedious than it is today, and really trying to apply pressure where it will cost the cyber criminal the most money. The second angle, second axis today, is that most of cyber criminals, they feel a kind of impunity. They are very good, at least some of them are very good at anonymization, at hiding their trails, and so on. But what we see in the field when we work on incident response with police forces is the complexity of the legal response. And I know there are plenty of discussion at EU level, and I think we should push more on that. And we should push also at a global level, because we all know here today that cyber criminals, they are not going to attack their own country or their own group of country. They're going to jump between different zones, making the legal response more and more complex. And I think the EU has really had to push on that at global level to increase the efficiency. The third point is that we're seeing the expertise to attack that is more and more accessible, more and more available. There are very structuration of a market, of a black market, of attack tools, of pre-attack reselling, that they provide foothold into the information system of companies, and there are a very strong ecosystem behind it. So I think as well that on the policy angle, we should try to regulate more that and criminalize part of that market. It's a very blurry topic because, you know, sometimes these tools are very useful for research or for securing information system, and at the same time, they can be used by cyber criminals to attack very harshly the information system. And last but not least, we're seeing an increasing number of targets with the digital transformation of every single organization right now. And there has been already a lot of work to increase the security level. Yesterday, my colleague Alessandro spoke a lot about NIS, and this has been a great improvement, but it has still to be pushed forward. GDPR has been a very great improvement. I think we should continue in that direction, but I think we should also push on the angle of the security by design for the suppliers of IT software, for hardware, and so on. The situation is improving, but most of the time right now, when you buy a new software, it's like buying a car without the safety belt. You have to have them put them afterwards. You have to have experts to screw the safety belt into the car and so on. I think we should push for more regulation on having a secure by design and having a liability of the software editors and the hardware maker on that. So that's the angle of the threats. And after, I wanted to discuss quickly with you about what we call the double-edged challenges regarding technology. The first one is about the cloud. It was discussed just before by Robert. The cloud is already and will be an enabler for an industrialized vision of IT, and we need that. The cloud is also very good for all the new security technologies that can be embedded and be very useful for security. But at the same time, the cyber criminals, they know exactly how to exploit these new cloud features. And I think something difficult we are living today in large corporations is that the cloud adoption is slowed down by the cyber border, the cyber protectionism we are seeing in many different countries. And the ability to have a fully large vision of a cloud system that is very flexible, that works at large scale, is completely broken right now and pose very specific cybersecurity risks. To give you an example, I'm right now working on how to connect securely the cloud from US actors, from China actors, from Russian actors on the same network of a very large corporation. And that is very complex regarding regulation, regarding data protection, regarding data sovereignty. So there are, I think, many ways to improve that situation regarding policy, and also maybe a new hope on the technology side with the confidential computing. I'm sure some of you have heard about that. It's a brand new set of technologies that have the ultimate goal to be able to work on encrypted data without decrypting it. So it would remove this kind of cyber border and the cyber protectionism. And I think at the EU level, it's something that we should really look very, very closely because it's really a game changer technologies. And that is the kind of technology where sovereignty will be very important, because being able to have trust in your own encryption technology is, for me, the key of sovereignty. So that is the first topic. The second one would be artificial intelligence. That's been discussed a little bit this morning, and it will be discussed afterwards. Today, artificial intelligence, it's already a tool for cyber criminals. They know how to use it to do some kind of very automated social engineering, how to break the CAPTCHA that protects some of the sites. But more importantly, I think the AI is a target for cyber criminals. We have seen the advancements of very specific attack methodologies to poison AI, to, with some kind of inference to gather secrets from AI, or to do some kind of evasion. You remember the experimentation where this you had to put some sticker on a stop sign on the road, and it transformed it on a road priority. So this kind of attacks are for real today. But AI is also a tool, a key tool for cybersecurity. Cybersecurity, the attacks are going very, very fast. So we need to automate the attack detection, the reaction, and we will need AI at some point. And there are many innovations to protect AI. And I think Europe has a role to play here as well, because we have the potential to create this new security solution. And very quickly, maybe you remember the Cyber Grand DARPA organization in the US, organized in 2016. It was the first AI-based hacking tournament, fully automated AI that were at the same time attacking themselves and protecting themselves. And I think that is really a concrete example of how AI is a double-edged technology. And I will conclude on the maybe more prospective view about the quantum computing. It's a very hot topic right now. You know that it's a major threat for cryptography. We envision that around 2040, a quantum computer may be able to break one of the key algorithms today for secure communication. And at the same time, it's also a very key opportunity for cybersecurity. There are already some kind of usage like the quantum key distribution or quantum random number generators that will enable more secure communication at the same time. And I think the long-term goal, which is still very theoretical right now, is the road to a quantum internet, where the security, confidentiality, integrity will be based not only on technological algorithm development and so on, but by physical properties that cannot be changed that easily and that cannot be attacked that easily. But it's a very long-term view. We will see what will come out of the different laboratory that works on that topic, and I think as well that EU has a role to play here. So as a conclusion, the coming years are going to be a real challenge for policymaking. The threats, they are quickly adapting with huge and renewed capabilities. The technologies, they are evolving at the speed of light, as you have witnessed with my talk this morning. So, and I think the policies really should enable this change and not block them. And finding the right balance is a very hard topic. And I think the most striking example is the cloud, with this concept of cyber protectionism, cyber borders, that is gaining traction. And I think we should, at some point, overcome that to allow the free and secure flow of data where it makes sense, respecting the confidentiality indeed of this data. So that was I wanted to speak with you this morning. Do not hesitate if you have any question. I will stop the sharing.
Okay, Jerome, thank you very much for this forward-looking presentation. Especially I like the most, this reference to dragon swords, and remember a lot of Middle Age sagas. Yeah. So let's open the discussion. We have about 5-6 minutes for discussion. I think we have probably Ghislaine Dessalines with the OECD as a question.
Yeah, I can see it in the chat. I don't know if Ghislaine wants to speak or not.
You can just use the chat. Exactly.
Okay, perfect. So the question was to address the issue of impunity. What is the potential role for deterrence? And especially all the discussion around the hackback or the active defense. This is a very tricky topic, and I like it very much because it shows the complexity of cybersecurity today. deterrence, it's very, very important. And I think deterrence should, at most, as much as possible, go to the individual level. It should be a deterrence for the individuals, for the cyber criminals. But as I said, regarding the judiciary, the complexity of legal response is not that easy. So we could start easily with what we call the active defense, meaning we are able to disrupt the infrastructure of the cyber criminals, especially trying to disrupt the hosters they use. You know, if cyber criminals, they rent a server in a data center somewhere to launch an attack, maybe we can contact the data center operators and have this server disconnected. So it's something that works legally in most of countries. But when you do that, it has a very short-term effect. It works for one operation at one time. So I think it's something that we should do and that should be more and more industrialized. And maybe some policy change could also help that, to have some kind of reactivity, of delay engagement for the hosters. And there are other active defense parts, maybe having a secure DNS, or maybe having, telecom networks that clean the traffic from the known cyber attacks. These could be very efficient to protect a large number of small organizations, small companies, and so on. But these are some drawbacks regarding civil liberty and things like that. So it should really be well managed. There is the topic of hackback, which is the next step, which is really to attack the infrastructure of the attackers, of the cyber criminals, to reveal their secrets or to erase their data and the servers. This is very complex, and to my opinion, should be left only to states, and that should be really done on a last resort. Because it's a very blurry topic, very complex world, the internet. When you attack a server, you don't know exactly what is behind this server. Maybe it's a server in an hospital that has been previously hacked by cyber criminals. And when you're going to erase that server, you're going to disrupt the operation of the hospital as well. So it has already to be managed very, very, very precisely. And I think it would be more interesting not to delete one server, but maybe, to be able to enter into the computer used by these cyber criminals, for example, to steal their key management system, and to be able to give the encryption key they use for their ransomware to every company that has been hacked, or maybe even to add some trap into the software they use for them to reveal who they really are. So yes, there are many new ways to think about fighting against the cyber criminals. We should not be only in the posture of, being behind our walls, putting bricks after bricks to brick new walls. We need to go outside of the castle. We need to be able to reply to these cyber criminals, but it has to be done in a very precise and legal way.
Okay, thanks, Jerome. We have just a couple of minutes left. If there are no other questions, I have a question for Jerome. You mentioned this issue of the fact that hackers now are not acting directly, but they use provider hacking. Okay, so there is this issue of dependencies. Do you know that this is an issue at the attention of the NIS review? How do you think this issue should be tackled down by the NIS review?
That's a good question. I think this ecosystem is really a multi-part ecosystem, and so I think the one of the key points within the NIS review should be the easy flow of information about the attackers and the global cooperation between all the member states. It's already a part of the first NIS text, but I think it should be maybe even more clearer and pushed more on the second version. This is the first step for disruption, And after, I think police cooperation, police forces cooperation should be also a hot topic here, not to stay only in the cyber world, but to have at some point real life impact on what is going on.
Okay, thank you very much, Jerome. Okay, I think we can thank Jerome and Robert for the very good presentation, and now we can move to the first panel of the day, the session Artificial Intelligence Cybersecurity. They will be chaired by Andrea Renda. Andrea, you have the floor.
Hello, good morning, everybody.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye to Jerome and Robert. Hope you can stay a little bit with us for this panel that we start now. This panel is building obviously on what has been said in the opening session this morning, but we go in the direction more specifically of venturing into the intersection of artificial intelligence and cybersecurity. And the session is titled "A Way Towards Enhancing the Synergies." Well, my impression when dealing with this topic is that only a year ago, it would have been much more difficult to claim that AI has a super important and extremely central role in cybersecurity. But already a few months ago, I think we had started realizing, and already say last year in our events and in our research reflections, we had started to realize that one of the first reasons why AI needs to be prominent and central in cybersecurity when it comes to public authorities is that AI is increasingly used in cyber attacks. And so there is very little alternative to deploying AI solutions in order to detect how cyber attacks and the format cyber attacks will take in the years to come. At the same time, understanding where AI is leading cybercrime and is essential for public authorities to understand how to remedy some of these solutions, and even in public policy, not necessarily also through technical measures. A week ago, I was involved in a conference that we organized together with EPFL in Lausanne, where some of the most well-known experts in artificial intelligence were offering their views on the future governance and policy of artificial intelligence. And one of the most famous one, a good friend of mine, Stuart Russell from UC Berkeley, actually advocated the adoption of a global ban on impersonation as a potential public policy solution for the future because of the extreme difficulty in tackling deepfakes, for example, and the possibility that the Andrea Renda that is talking to you and maybe saying relatively meaningful or meaningless things in this conference is not the real one. Maybe he's a PhD student that Andrea has managed to retain, obviously for no remuneration, to adopt his resemblance and maybe his voice and introduce and moderate this panel. But obviously, this would be a rather harmless solution. But there will be many other applications of deepfakes that you might imagine that would be way more worrying, right? And that said, the intersection between AI and cybercrime is becoming increasingly important and increasingly central, also in the mind of the policymaker at the EU level. We will hear from the European Commission shortly. I could testify that this was a key concern where I, together with my 51 teammates in the high-level expert group on artificial intelligence of the European Commission, decided to focus on something else, something broader than pure ethical alignment on AI, but to go in the direction of so-called trustworthy AI, which means legally compliant, ethically adherent AI, but most important, socio-technically robust AI, which incorporates the security element and the cybersecurity element in particular. This is extremely important, but also should not lead us to ignore the fact that AI can present both opportunities and challenges when it comes to cybersecurity. The introduction of AI element in pre-existing products obviously can create potential new avenues for external attacks, so thereby potentially challenging resilience, and requires adequate governance and technical arrangements. And at the same time, AI can increase security and robustness and resilience in products and in value chains, for example, thanks to its ability to detect patterns, anomalies, intervene in real time in some of these cases. So all this, I think, as a background of a field of work that is emerging more and more clearly in the field of, in both fields, I'd say, in the field of digital technology more generally, and thereby also in the subfields of artificial intelligence and cybersecurity. CEPS has already developed quite a lot of reflections, and also thanks to our members and our researchers and the participants to our past events, there has been already not only a task force on AI and several initiatives on cybersecurity in the past. Well, we saw already several months ago the need for a joint reflection between AI and cybersecurity. The leader of that reflection is Lorenzo Pupillo, and I don't need to obviously introduce him because he's been the deus ex machina of the whole cybersecurity at CEPS summit these days. So this makes my life as moderator much easier. I can just hand over to Lorenzo to tell us what's the state of your reflection together with all the other stakeholders that participated in this phenomenal initiative, which is the Task Force on AI and Cybersecurity. Thanks, Lorenzo, for taking the floor.
Okay, thank you very much, Andrea, for this very nice introduction that will make my job easier because, you know, you said already quite a few things. Just a few words on the task force. This task force is multi-stakeholder by definition. It involves 17 private organizations, 8 EU institutions, 2 international organizations, 5 university think tanks, and 2 civil society organizations. It has been working for quite a few months, and we are almost close to complete our work, and we are working on the final draft of the report. Some basic message. First of all, as Andrea also was mentioning, artificial intelligence is showing enormous promises for improving our daily life, and when we come to cybersecurity, we can say, using also the suggestion that Professor Taddeo, this in the panel, brought in the task force, that artificial intelligence can help cybersecurity in 3 ways: improving system robustness, response, and resilience. Robustness means the ability of a system to maintain its initial stable configuration even when it processes erroneous inputs, thanks to self-testing and self-healing software. Second, AI can be used to enhance system response, the capacity of a system to respond autonomously to attacks, decide which vulnerability to attack and which point, and being able also to counterattack. Okay. Third, AI can strengthen system resilience, the ability of a system to resist and tolerate an attack by facilitating threat anomaly detection and allowing security analysts to retrieve information about cyber threat. Just to give you, to quantify, the potential benefit of all this combined effort, let's put it this way, we can quote the recent IBM report on cost of data breach 2020, mentioned the role that security automation technology based on AI, machine learning analytics, and the automated orchestration played increasing security effectiveness. And they show this data. In 2020, the average total cost of data breach was 2.45 million for companies that use security automation. This figure is 3.58 million less than the average cost of organization without security automation. So there is a significant saving, reduction of the impact of cyber attack if we use automated orchestration, AI, for cybersecurity. However, as any powerful general purpose dual use technology, AI, can also be used in a malicious way. And when we talk about AI and cybersecurity, basically, we can say that AI, it expands the threat landscape in 2 directions. On one end, it expands existing threats. On the other hand, introduce new threat and alters the typical characteristic of threat. Why expanding of CST threat? Basically because we are facing what experts call the democratization of artificial intelligence. In other words, the technology is becoming so cheap and increasingly effective that almost everybody can use artificial intelligence. Okay. On the other hand, introducing new threat. Andrea mentioned to some of this, like voice manipulation. We know that now, for instance, there are applications that can make phishing extremely sophisticated. Like you can get a call from a person supposed to be your boss and ask to transfer money, and instead it's an attacker. Okay. Deepfakes. Andrea made the example of the student that take his place, in class maybe. And Jerome earlier mentioned the possibility from artificial intelligence to breaking captcha. GANs, generative adversarial network now are able in 0.05 seconds, to breaking captcha. But what also is interesting to note that AI in cybersecurity, can change the typical character of threats and the new form of vulnerability on AI system. Contrary to traditional cyber attack that are bugs based on bugs or human mistake in code, they are mainly aiming at stealing data and disrupting a system. The goals of attacking an AI system is to acquire control of the target system. And this is done by data poisoning, tampering, or categorization, model, and backdoor. We have to understand this is extremely important to work on securing AI, because we look also at both sides. We look at the AI for cybersecurity and cybersecurity for AI, how to make AI more secure. AI systems are IT systems, software running on hardware that have specific internal and user features. They must be cyber protected as any other IT system, but additional protection must be designed for the special feature, namely the training phase, the interaction with the environment, and the possibility of runtime system evolution. This needs to be done through the whole life cycle of the AI product, from the creation to the termination, ideation, planning, design, build, test, deploy. Okay, this is extremely important. But at the same time, the task force put forward some interesting question from the ethical standpoint. If we go back to the three basic positive aspects of AI for cybersecurity: robustness, system response, system resilience, we saw that there are pairing challenges: system robustness, control. Who is controlling the AI system? How do we make sure that the system is behaving according to our expectation? System response, responsibility. How do we ascribe responsibility for autonomous response system? In other words, if this system start to fight against each other autonomously, what's going to happen here? System resilience, skills. If we delegate threat detection to machine, how do we make sure an analyst will still be able to do it? We face a de-skilling problem here. So this poses an interesting issue. In other words, while delegation of robustness, resilient response should occur, some form of controls are necessary. We have also to take into account that we need to exercise some type of control on this, and this should be done through company in-house development of application, testing of data, adversarial training between AI system, parallel and dynamic monitoring of this system. There is also another issue that was brought up by also Joanna Bryson, that was also in the advisory board. This issue of anthropomorphism. This is an area of risk for AI. Neural networks, should be clear, are not like a brain. They are designed by human beings. So talking about brains, or worse yet, consciousness, may be a way to evade regulation oversight. So how we can balance, this positive and let's say negative aspect of artificial intelligence? The task force is putting forward some policy overarching recommendation. I will not go in detail because this will be, the scope of the final report. But just to give you the flavor of what we are looking at, it's first of all, we think that we need to enhance the collaboration between policymakers and the technical community as to better investigate, prevent, and mitigate potential malicious use of AI in cybersecurity. Second, we need to mandate prior to the implementation of an AI system a suitability testing exercise in order to evaluate the related security risk. Such tests to be performed by all stakeholders involved in a deployment project have to weight value, ease of attack, damage, opportunity, cost, and alternative. Third, we need to address the risk of mandate company to address the risk of AI attacks. Once the AI system is implemented and strengthen AI general safety by putting in place detection mechanisms that would alert that adversarial attacks are occurring and that the system in question is no longer functioning within specified parameters. And after which we need to have a fallback plan that should be activated. This requires also to activate ad hoc taxonomy of adversarial attacks in order to make sure a fallback plan can be sufficiently able to address all the various forms of adversarial attack. But extremely important is to devote also time and effort to strengthen AI security as it's related to maintaining accountability across intelligence systems by requiring knowing the architecture of the system, having specified in terms of the design, documentation, its component, how they are integrated. Okay, this should be done following some steps like securing logs related to the development code of the system. We should know who changed what, when, and why. Okay, having cybersecurity pedigree for all software libraries linked to that code, having cybersecurity pedigrees for any data libraries used for training and machine learning. When machine learning is used, keep track of the model parameters and training procedures. Another area of activity that we recommend is craft an attack response plan and create a map of all the possible perturbations that could affect other AI systems. Focus on supporting the reliability of AI in standard and certification models. Support AI certification effort. We suggest to be coordinated also by ENISA. We should follow a proactive approach and demand assessment action to be taken prior to any deployment, as well as during the whole life cycle of product, service, or process. Also, an interesting suggestion that comes from the research community, to some extent mimicking what happened with the IT vulnerability disclosure, envisage appropriate limitation to the full openness policy for research output in order to enable a more complete assessment of the security risk related to the technology and this vulgarization. Indeed, because the vulgarization of AI is one of the of the issue that is making to some extent more democratic, as I mentioned before, AI, but also as a counter effect. And so there's this issue of decide what to do in terms of full openness policy for research. And finally, evaluate the current and future dual use and export control regulatory framework against the impact of AI system in cybersecurity, and address the skill shortage and uneven distribution of talent and professional amongst market players. These are, some of the policy recommendation that the task force putting forward. But we hope in a few weeks to be able to publish, our full report. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Lorenzo, for this comprehensive overview of the work that is being done also within CEPS and the emerging orientations towards policy. Obviously, there will be more concrete policy recommendations to be discussed once the report is out. So to all the participants, stay tuned because it seems that the report is imminent, so forthcoming, and so we will be presenting this very soon. I'll now turn to Ioannis Askoxilakis. Kalimera, Ioannis, and So it was a cybersecurity policy officer at the European Commission. And Ioannis, would you give us your view? The Commission is in cybersecurity policy always a little bit in between other players, right? The member states being very strong players, but also agencies like ENISA, international organizations like NATO, or European agencies like the European Defense Agency. So many of them create a sort of a surrounding environment in which the Commission gradually is carving out its space. And we at CEPS have been quite supportive of an enhanced role at the European Union level of institutions for cybersecurity. We are very happy to have you with us. So I give you the floor for your presentation. Thanks again, Ioannis. The floor is yours.
Many thanks, Andrea, and many invitation and your activities, and which is very well aligned to the activities that we have, as you said, with various organizations, including ENISA, Europol, EDA, but also all the Commission services. So, to start with, artificial intelligence and cybersecurity are strategic multi-purpose technological domains and business domains with important implications and at the same time significant potential society and the economy, as many speakers already said. In that context, they both are priorities for the European Union's digital policy. And that way, the Commission and Member States, as you said, are already undertaking considerable work in both domains. The Commission has highlighted the importance of AI in society in its white paper on which we could say is the front runner to upcoming policy initiatives, and also has recognized the strategic importance of AI in the respective coordinated action plan, which aims to harmonize and coordinate AI initiatives across the Union, including its security and cybersecurity related aspects. Also, in the new Security Union strategy, the Commission underlined the significance of artificial intelligence, noting that it will be, but also new risks, and this was an important element. So, very often when we talk about security in public debates, at least in the past, we tend to the impact of AI on security, on safety, and on cybersecurity. And of course, this aspect is essential, cybersecurity and AI. However, the picture is being completed when we look the other way around, how we ensure the cybersecurity of AI technology in general. So, for example, AI and machine learning algorithms to protect ourselves and respond to emerging cyber threats or cyber attacks. How we can ensure that these algorithms themselves are protected from any form of interference or misuse. Similarly, how can we ensure that artificial intelligence technologies that secure our home remotely, or cars that are becoming increasingly semi-autonomous or autonomous, is it safe enough and secure enough to prevent all this data from ending up in the wrong hands? What is essential of itself, and in particular, it is important first to understand what needs to be secured. Models that are specific to artificial intelligence technology. It is important to understand the related models, including designing, evaluating, and protecting the data, of course, but also the process of training AI systems in general. And it is important to develop specific measures to ensure, of course, AI. In cybersecurity, have this multi-dimensional and a series of interdependencies. If we could mention, as already said, the cybersecurity for AI to support cybersecurity, and this was already addressed from various talk. So how can AI the operations means to create smarter cybersecurity, to develop more effective security controls, active firewalls, smart antivirus, or automated cyber threat intelligence for operations, and in general, automated cyber defense to facilitate the efforts of of law enforcement authorities, and this it relates also to, let's say, our activities with member states, in a way that they better respond to cybersecurity incidents and cybercrime. In this context, we should also mention this exponential growth context of investigations, and this dimension would use of artificial intelligence, adversarial AI, where more sophisticated types of attacks, for example, advanced social engineering, as you already know, fake news, deep generative mode data, even traditional incidents, AI augmented denial of service attacks. And the above three dimensions, I'm mentioning them because are the key elements of architecture, if I may say, of the AI threat landscape currently working with the support of the Commission, several European institutions and agencies, including recently published a very interesting report on AI and the relation to cyber. On the Commission side, of course, on the long term, we want to develop the culture of cybersecurity by design, as already presented, with the security built in from the start into products, services, and processes. And in this direction, of course, the EU Cybersecurity Act and cybersecurity certification has an important role to play. And this could touch also AI in the future. Let's see. But the work and the efforts to ensure the cybersecurity of AI will also tools for the future to help create safer and technologies and address all these challenges that we mentioned. And in this direction, on the Commission side, we already fund projects, for example, cybersecurity projects under Horizon 2020 for building secure application and services, aware application and services, but also AI. Projects that aim to develop AI-based solutions for various application domains, such as autonomous cars, things. And here it's our initiative in DG Connect on the creation of the EU Cybersecurity Competence Center, which will help us make the best use of our cybersecurity resources and expertise across Europe to leadership and the industrial capacities that we market. And this goes hand in hand with key objectives to increase competitiveness at the European Union of the cybersecurity industry, but also turn cyber to other European industries. And here, of course, AI is one we're considering. So we want also to look at how AI computing can help enhance incident response capability, law enforcement capacity in digital investigation, and make sure that all member states and the respective national authorities have the appropriate tools, techniques, and skills in order to deal with the incidents and the cybercrime in general. And looking forward, and I stop here, the Commission wants to make digital technologies, and here AI and cybersecurity are key technology. We wish to make it the key elements of our recovery from the current crisis. So the assessing, and of course, we will continue to invest in research, in development, and deployment of these technologies. Large-scale programs that we have, Horizon Europe, the new Digital Europe program, and the Connecting European Facility 2 program. So thank you very much for the kind invitation, and happy to answer any questions that may arise.
Thank you very much, Ioannis. I hope we will have a few minutes for Q&A. Just to get you prepared, I will probably provoke you a little bit on awareness raising and education as potential complements of cybersecurity by design and other initiatives in the future. So what is cooking there on the side of the European Commission, if anything, and perhaps maybe I was stimulated by your reference to the Cybersecurity Act and the potential to merge the emerging cybersecurity certification with the conformity assessment procedures for AI that have been considered within the forthcoming AI regulation. So just for you to get ready in case we have some time, I might want to stimulate you on this. Now, let me turn to Marco Hartwig, who's the Chief Information Security Officer for the Europe, Middle East, and Africa, right? For Zurich Insurance Group, and someone who basically breathes risk and cybersecurity on a daily basis, I guess. So, Marco, we're very happy to have you with us and get a perception of whether we are doing enough or we should be doing different things in order to tackle the synergies and exploit the synergies between AI and cybersecurity. Over to you.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Thank you for the nice invitation and the opportunity to speak. What I heard so far was very, very interesting, right? From a CISA perspective, from a security practitioner perspective, I guess it's very important to have a good feeling on what is the movement on policy making, what can support decisions that we make in terms of utilizing artificial intelligence to be sure we are doing the right things, that ideas we have, initiatives or prototypes that we build are in compliance. So that is a very important topic. I'm speaking here as a CISO from Zurich Insurance, but I guess every CISO more or less has the same sphere of responsibility and the same ask towards policies in order to move into or to maneuver in safe waters, right? So when we talk about AI, I would say we are, for the time being, and you mentioned it in the beginning, as AI is a rather new topic, right? 2 years ago, nobody really spoke about AI. It was more like robotics or machine learning, right? And I guess the machine learning aspect of AI is really the one that we are utilizing already to a certain extent for the time being is kind of a symbiosis between what humans can do, what humans are good at, and what AI maybe is specifically good at, right? In terms of efficiency, machine learning is specifically interesting because with a lot of sensors in our networks, we are provided with a lot of information. To go through all this information, take the right conclusions, and bring it to a consolidated state that a human can really understand what the information really tells us. It's very time consuming. It's repetitive work. It's very difficult to sustain people interest in that. So if this can be done by an algorithm, by a machine instead of humans, I guess that would in a cybersecurity job description job world would also be more attractive to humans to do more conceptual work, to really do strategies instead of just number crunching and trying to come to the right information, right? So therefore, it's important that what we consume as tools in terms of machine learning and AI is, of course, robust. Does not necessarily come as a black box. If it comes as a black box, right, it needs to be certified as compliant to policies from a policy perspective, but also from an ethical perspective. So we need to understand what the algorithms are doing, how our data that we trust, maybe a supplier, a software as a service solution with, how they deal with the information, right? It's not just because we have to comply to certain policies like GDPR or others. It's really also the PII data, confidential data, is something which are the crown jewels of every company, and therefore this needs to be in safe water, right? So as a CISO, I have to have a certain level of trust that I can onto those certifications already, that I can say, okay, if I use this tool set, for example, I move in a compliant sphere. Right? We talked also, or we heard already a lot of you know, that phishing attacks gets more sophisticated. The dark side, let's say, is using artificial intelligence as well. That means they get quicker and quicker and quicker, right? And an attacker can move on a speedboat level, right? They can maneuver, they can be very quick. As a CISO of a large organization, I have to maneuver a tanker, right? A big ship that is sometimes a little bit slow in response. So if artificial intelligence can help me to get quicker and potentially slow the attacker down, right? This is something which is very important. But I think in order to do that, it's maybe a little bit more than machine learning. It's a little bit like, you know, like a goal play, right? I have to see and anticipate the next move of the attacker. And if this is something that AI can help as well with, I guess it's even more important to ensure that we have the right policies in place, because everything you could do with AI, it can be used for malicious purposes as well, needs to be somehow blocked from an ethical standpoint and from a legal standpoint. So I guess this more or less defines a bit the ask in terms of policy. On the other hand, of course, it's very attractive. It's an emerging field. What we can do with AI in terms of defense against attackers, right? Have a real dynamic segregation of our network, creating a ad hoc virtual environment where an attacker would think he really is in our production environment, but just follow our lures and our traps that we lay out for him in order to study his behavior and maybe come up with countermeasures that are really really effective. And use this knowledge also on a broader scale, share it with others, have a collaboration, not only to defend against a specific attack or threat that we see for the time being, but really help to, let's say, raise the bar for other collaborations, for other companies, for other CISOs to have the right knowledge, to know how to respond against certain threats, and so on, right? And I guess the collaboration layer is a very important one, because this also ties back into something that everyone needs to do, is the system hygiene, right? We have to keep our systems robust. That term was used quite a lot of time. That means that we have to understand our vulnerabilities in our systems, that we have to manage them correctly, and that they need to be somehow risk level or risk rated in terms of the actual security risks. This is a bit of a paradigm shift from how vulnerability management, patch management was done in the past. Certain backlog we have to work off, so to come to zero. And now the risk and the threat aspect comes into play also, where AI can help us with to really prioritize what we have to do first, and also support us in formulating the risk that we see from a cybersecurity perspective and translate it into a business risk, right? So all these opportunities that come with AI, and which I'm very keen to pursue, they need to be backed up by the right policies and by the right certifications. So, and I guess I could mention, of course, more examples, but the key message that I want to transport is really like we are specifically looking at the policy makers to really support this, to take a little bit of concern that we naturally have from us and put it into a framework that we can rely on and that we can also consume. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marco. And indeed, what you say is extremely important. And there are a couple of things that I would like you to keep in mind for maybe our last 10 minutes of Q&A. One is, how do you see the prospects for certification and cybersecurity? There are already, there is at least one field in which we've had an explicit recognition of the fact that having software and potentially AI embedded in a product already immediately leads to a different risk classification. This is medical devices, right? Where the new framework for medical devices already basically determines that a medical device becomes class 2 if it has embedded sophisticated software, and in particular when it has AI embedded. And there's a lot of skepticism around as to whether this risk certification can tackle all the risks that will then materialize once the AI is deployed on the market. So, and the fact that certification and conformity assessment would probably need to move away from pure ex-ante controls into a constant governance and surveillance of products in the market. So that is something that really maybe hopefully we have time. So if I don't talk too long, for example, we might have time to tackle it. But just want to anticipate a couple of things that I found to be very interesting. And the other thing, maybe I can turn to Maria Rosaria Tadeo already on this, is this idea of can we fight a non-explainable AI with a constraint that AI be explainable? Meaning, if we put ourselves into a mode that I would define as defense against the dark arts, by borrowing terms from Harry Potter, when we do defense against the dark arts, do we need to go beyond a purely explainable AI, or is the explainability a limit to responding to AI that follows maybe more obscure patterns? Let's see. I don't know if Maria Rosaria wants to incorporate this in her presentation, but certainly I'm happy to give her the floor. Maria Rosaria is now associate professor at Oxford University, and she's been also very helpful and assisting CEPS and Lorenzo in particular in the AI and cybersecurity task force, but also very prolific author in this field. in the intersection between AI technology and ethics and security. So, Maria Rosaria, I give you the floor for your presentation, and then you'll come back with all the other speakers into hopefully a few minutes of questions and answers. Thanks for being with us.
Sure. Thank you so much, and good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for CEPS for having me here today. So let me just by thanking Lorenzo, because he did a fantastic job recalling a paper we published a year ago in Nature about exactly the risks of trusting AI in cybersecurity. What you and I were saying is actually a perfect segue to what I wanted to stress today, following up the presentations of Ioannis and Marco, both very interesting. So there is one element which is important to stress, I think, here, which is that AI, when used in whatever systems we might deploy it, whether for cybersecurity purposes or not, it becomes a Trojan horse. And it becomes a Trojan horse because it's a technology that it's not robust. And we cannot make it robust. We can make it more robust, but we will never make it completely robust. In computer science, experts talk of robustness of AI as an intractable problem. So it's something that requires astronomically large numbers of risks to be considered. So something which is not logically impossible, but very much unfeasible. And so this lack of robustness of AI is as important, if not more important, than the black box or the lack of explanation of AI, to come to your question. I think that, yes, if we could have, going back to Harry Potter, which I didn't read, but I gather is a wizard, if we could have a magic wand, we would make AI explicable, transparent. But we can't. Or at least we cannot do it all the way, 100%. But we can work around the lack of transparency, the lack of explicability of AI, by understanding what are the other limits and trying to define measures there that can help us to navigate these limits. So the lack of robustness of AI, and I'll address this in two ways. So first, thinking about pragmatic aspect, and then more conceptual, if you allow me, is a problem that we can address exactly by making the shift that you were mentioning. We need to abandon the idea that we design the perfect technology, and then once it's designed perfectly, complying to all possible certification, making it ethically sound, checked all the legal and ethical compliance, then once it's deployed, we're safe. This is not the case. It's not the case with digital, because we know that a lot of the digital stuff can be repurposed. It's not the case with AI, because AI learns and refines its behavior. And it's not the case with AI because AI is not robust. So this means that there might be some ways in which attackers will not have to use another AI systems to attack us. They just need to enter into an AI system to change its behavior. A black box. A trigger hidden into an AI systems might never be found if it is played skillfully enough to make change the behavior of the AI system, just enough for the malicious actors to do what they want to do, but not too much so that the owner will ever realize it. So it's this kind of worries that we should, I think, also keep in mind when thinking about AI and cybersecurity. And the solution there is actually what you were doing, we're considering, moving from an ex ante to a continuous monitoring of AI. And this means having clear criteria, for example, of procurement of AI when it comes to using AI for security purposes or for national critical infrastructures. Procurement, which will mean procurement criteria, which will mean understanding how a model is trained, developed, who has had access to it, which kind of data. So these are all important elements. Lorenzo mentioned the in-house development, the adversarial training, and the constant monitoring. But there is another element as well, which is the auditing of AI, which has been left on the side, but actually needs to become central. We need to make sure that the AI systems are audited, both from an ethical perspective, so understanding whether there are lack of responsibilities that are not being addressed, whether there are any biases there, whether there is any issue with the lack of transparency, but also from a security point of view. And then there is a third element. We talked about certification, but that's only part of the story. We learned in pre-AI days, should we say, with WannaCry, that there is a big point of failure on a global level, which is the lack of sharing of relevant information among allies. The US didn't share important information about vulnerabilities of Microsoft systems, which were then harnessed by those who played WannaCry. So I would say that along the side of certification, which is indeed an important element, and is a geopolitical element, not just a technical element or just a political element, because certification then opens markets. So, and when we define certification when it comes to digital, there are a lot of geopolitical and even ethical, I would say, aspects to consider. But aside, on the side of this, there is making sure that we establish rules and regulation for which it is compelling, it is necessary for members of alliances, NATO, member states of federations like the European Union, to share relevant information about vulnerabilities, because that's a way of slowing the Trojan horse, as it were. So as you can tell, I'm not too optimistic about making AI totally robust or totally secure, but it's a way of mitigating the risks. And this takes me to the conceptual thing or element I wanted to mention, which is this relation between trustworthy AI, robust AI, and reliable AI. There is a lot of narrative pushing for trustworthy AI, European guidelines, in which Andrea, you are part of, the OECD principles, even the US trustworthy has become a key word when it comes to AI. I would like to flag there is a little bit of a slippery slope there, because trust invites the idea that we delegate a task and do not control how that task is performed. And when it comes to AI, this is exactly what we don't want to have. We want to have some forms of monitoring there, because AI is not robust, because AI can be is a fragile, is a vulnerable technology. And so what I suggested also last year is that it might be worth to make a shift and move from trustworthy AI to reliable AI. So an AI that we use and harness for its many potentials, but on which we also envisage meaningful and effective forms of control, which means forms which are feasible in terms of computational time, economics, values of companies working on AI for cybersecurity, but also that are able to, or that allow us to identify threats as they come in and know when it's too late. And I'll stop with this one.
Thanks, Maria Rosaria. Indeed, you pointed at a number of aspects that are extremely important and also far from settled in the debate, also in Brussels, meaning that the idea of, for example, specific forms of human oversight as regulatory requirements that could potentially be imposed on artificial intelligence systems or applications that are considered to be high risk is something that is proving to be a much more, let's say, a fluid and intractable topic than one could actually think of at the beginning of this debate. Let's say that you could actually have an easy risk classification of AI solutions and systems. You could easily conceptualize human oversight, whereas in most cases, this is a set of governance arrangements that, as you were mentioning, change depending on the conditions and on a case-by-case basis. So I was wondering whether you think, first of all, that it makes sense to classify AI as high risk, low risk, and then intervene only on the high risk one. Because based on what you say, it seems that there are very few things, it's very difficult to identify an AI system or solution that is low or no risk. And second, whether you think that adding an element which is the IoT element as part of systems where AI is deployed is further exacerbating our problem with the resilience and robustness of those systems. There's a lot of skepticism in the scientific community on the current use of IoT or the ability of several IoT devices to really expand and densify the attack surface, if you wish. And finally, just a little provocation, which is. I understand your concerns on delegating tasks to AI systems, but in some cases it's very difficult to imagine the ability of a human to intervene in real time. So I just wanted to hear from you whether you think this form of human oversight or the alternative governance arrangements for human oversight can also be seen as, in some cases, taking the form of simply having a human legally responsible for cases in which an AI gets it wrong and being able to react promptly, or you would always want to have a human in or on the loop. So maybe I get back to you immediately on those questions, and then I'll bring into the picture the other speakers. Thanks.
Sure. So I'll start from the last one, just because it's something that is quite involved in the recent work I'm doing with the Ministry of Defense here. So I didn't say that it has to be a human who controls or monitors AI. That's a whole different story. So I was referring to the concept of trust, which implies some form of delegation with no control. The idea is that we want to delegate, because AI can do a lot of things much better, much faster, and more efficiently than we do. We don't want to lose, however, the ability to control. Now, the ability to control is to make sure that AI does the things that we want it to do in the way we want it to do. One way of maintaining control, for example, is to develop a clone system of the AI that we deploy in the wild, and to maintain it in some secured controlled conditions, and then compare the behaviors of the two systems, so that one is the benchmark on the other. And if the system that we deploy in the wild is behaving radically different or some way different from the one that we maintain in controlled conditions, that should flag some kind of an alert, an alarm, and then we start seeing what's wrong there. So that's the kind of monitoring or control I'm considering there. With respect to having a human on the loop or in the loop or post loop, or just acquiring responsibility for the mistakes, that's a bit less, shall we say, interesting. Because we want to ascribe responsibility. In our societies, we ascribe responsibility to ascribe punishment or rewards. But I think the priority should be to make AI work in the way we want it to work, so that we can harness its potential. So yes, the role of the human there, I think it's a bit, let me phrase it in a more propositive way. We need to find more smarter solution in terms of tracking what AI does and being able to intervene when AI does something wrong. Or assess the situation clearly and say, well, in some contexts, AI is too quick. So if it does a mistake, we cannot intervene promptly to stop it. But perhaps we realize the mistake immediately, and so we make sure that it's not repeated immediately by the AI. Now, with AI and IoT and risks, that's a very good question. And in an ideal world, what we would say is that we want to address all the risks, understand all the risks that are there posed by AI. In the world in which we live, especially when we think about IoT, and you're right, that's the huge tsunami that is emerging, the connection between IoT, 5G, and AI, that would be unfeasible, because a lot of the IoT devices will be cheap, too cheap to afford proper risk certification, proper robustness, and so on and so forth. But even then, we forget there is a third element to be considered, which is the public actor, which is the state, which is the European Union, as far as we are concerned. There is a shift that has to be made, which is that cybersecurity, we have considered it a duty of the private sector. You sell whatever device, you sell whatever service, it better be secure. Because, and here is a little bit of philosophy, I'm afraid, it betrays that I am a philosopher, because we live in an age that we call the age of the information revolution, because we live in an environment that we now call the infosphere, the security of this environment has become a public good. So it's something that has to be maintained and supported also by the public actor. So the unfeasibility of having, for example, a complete risk register, risk assessment of AI plus IoT devices should be somehow mitigated or helped with by support in terms of standards, in terms of fundings, in terms of skills made available from the public sector, because the security of, allow me to be for a moment trivial, the security of our fridges becomes the security of our societies to some extent. And if you are heading into the direction in which we have IoT fridges powered with AI, well, we have to find ways to make them secure, because that becomes an element of security of societies.
Thanks a lot, Maria Rosaria. And these are fascinating answers and issues on which we could continue for a long time, and we probably will continue if you allow us, maybe in future events, because obviously the debate on those issues is only going to become more urgent and more important and systemic, if you wish. I want to go back to Marco and ask him about again these forms of risk assessment and the potential to fight black boxes with only explainable AI. I don't know if you have, in the meanwhile, reflected a little bit on that side, Marco.
So I think what was said was very, very important, that those black boxes, we understand them maybe now, they should not remain black boxes, right? There need to be procedures put in place to make sure that they are constantly reviewed, that they're constantly improved, that also that they are following the same dynamics as they are created for, right? To make things more efficient, more transparent, more trustworthy or reliable. And I guess this reliability and trustworthiness needs to be regained in certain, let's say, in certain cycles, because the environment around us changes. What was said also is we need to understand those systems better, because a hijacked AI system that maybe does the reverse opposite of what we intend to achieve with it, right, would be a complete nightmare. And if we would go into a state where we say, okay, we have this black box, we trust it, we don't have to look at it again, I guess that would be a trap. So therefore, I guess the certification, the recertification and revision improvements would be very, very important, and should be kind of mandatory, at least for the considered critical AI systems that we implement.
Yeah, no, I agree with this, Marco. That's it's one of the key aspects that still await full clarification in the governance of the system. And I think the combination of the answers that Maria Rosaria and you gave, I think, give us a perfect segue for asking Ioannis whether he thinks that we will see a convergence, let's say, of the debate on the certification within the Cybersecurity Act and the conformity assessment, market surveillance, post-market control and governance aspects of the AI regulation, and whether, just allow me to be a little bit theatrical and dramatic here, the European Commission is fully aware of the nightmare of the IoT tsunami for cybersecurity. It's something that on which we've briefly touched with in the interaction with Maria Rosaria, and whether you think enhanced governance arrangements will be needed.
Thank you, Andrea. This is indeed a very, very interesting question and domain. Starting from a philosophical, let's say, question, what is the exact definition of AI if we want to consider it for a certification scheme? And I'm saying that because there is this AI effect that we have all the time. We are doing our devices more smart, and after that, we tend to not to include that in this AI concept. So we think of AI of anything that hasn't been done, while the devices already have various degrees of intelligence. We are talking about IoT. We are talking about smart objects. We have IoT devices that enable semi-autonomous or autonomous operations at the field. So the question is whether logical approach we have, let's say, the IoT in the field, then we have the networks that connect the first, then we have the cloud that collects all this information and the applications on top of it. If you think like that, you can understand that AI is already embedded in all layers. So you have it at IoT, you have smart networks, and of course, everything somebody can claim that starts from the cloud. I mean, where the intelligence there is much stronger. Now, whether we would need to go for, AI dedicated schemes or not, this is, of course, an open question. And that's why within the Cybersecurity Act, we have the European Cybersecurity Certification Group, member states represented there, but also the industry, the stakeholders cybersecurity certification group, that are important stakeholders in defining, for example, our union rolling work program and what future schemes come. And while there are discussions even for the IoT, we have various type of requirements for consumer IoT or for industrial and control system, automation and control systems. What I can say that there in these particular certification schemes in the future, of course, the intelligence of these technologies should be included in technology. Now, whether in the end we will go for something separate, this could be the case or not, nobody knows. But definitely, what is necessary is, first of all, to have a very clear definition what we want to certify against which standards.
Andrea, if I may.
Yes, Lorenzo, I'm about to give you the floor. And
no, just to on this
Yes.
issue, I want just to mention that CEPS with other companies, it's working on a project supported by the European Commission exactly on this issue of the need of cybersecurity requirement for ICT products. And so we look also at this issue of smart fridge and what are the policy implications. Should we suggest minimum requirements? Should we leave to voluntary agreement and so on? And so this we look at that. We make sure that the smart fridge will deliver good Italian food for Maria Rosaria, because maybe Brexit, will create problem for that.
That would be fantastic.
Okay, so to wrap up, maybe Lorenzo, I get back to you with also because we are a bit behind schedule. We have, I think, covered a lot of ground with this discussion. So I very much want to thank Ioannis, Marco, and Maria Rosaria for sharing their thoughts with us and also interacting in a very lively conversation. Lorenzo, as you are both organizer and speaker here, I just hand over to you to just transition us towards not the smart fridge, but anyway, a coffee break, which we will have to consume in a very decentralized way, I'm afraid. But on my side also, thanks for having me, for inviting me to moderate this super interesting panel, and good luck for the remainder of the conference. Over to you, Lorenzo.
Okay, thank you very much, Andrea. So now we have, following the schedule, we have a break. Unfortunately, we have to cut it. Maybe we have to. Now it's almost 5 to noon, and so we will reconvene at 12:05. Okay, and we will have the last panel of the day on global data governance and digital sovereignty. Okay, and so let's reconvene about 10 minutes. Okay, thank you. Okay, it's 12:05. I think we can reconvene and we can start. I will give the floor to Paul Timmers from Oxford University to chair the panel. Paul, the floor is yours.
Very good. Thank you, Lorenzo. Do you hear me well?
Yes, I do.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Welcome to all of the participants and especially also the panelists in this panel on global data governance and digital sovereignty. I will give a short introduction and then we will have our four speakers here. Wolfgang Kleinwachter, Elettra Ronchi, Pierre Chastanet, and Corina Schulze, who replaces Andreas Tegge. This is the last panel in what I think has been very exciting discussions organized here by CEPS with the support of various partners on topics that are really, really hot in the Brussels scene and far beyond. I myself am discussing a lot with people across Europe, and I see that these topics are really in the picture and that this is additionally the case because, in fact, there is a lot of policy development happening right now. We are talking here about things like sovereignty, we are talking about data governance, and from a political science point of view, if you talk about sovereignty, it's one of those concepts of which everybody has an idea and which has been around for a very, very long time, for ages, and it's about territory, the people, it's about values, it's about, let's say, as Thierry Breton has once called it, what belongs to us. And it's also very much about the internal legitimacy between the state and the citizens and the external legitimacy of a state or perhaps the European Union towards other partners in the world. And you will see here that often people will talk about digital sovereignty, and what they really often talk about is the capabilities to keep sovereignty up, to maintain and perhaps expand sovereignty and strengthen sovereignty. So that's coming more from the originally military area. Strategic autonomy is about capabilities and capacities, but we'll have discussion about it because everybody has different views on that. Now, in this debate here, I hope we can also go a bit from the concepts to, so what is it that we can actually do? Because these are topics that really bite, and when we ask what is it that we can legally do and what is it that we can do in terms of means, and then I'm talking about Europe, for example, then it becomes really hard. And also, equally importantly, what are we willing to do? And how does that fit in the geopolitical context? Well, these are all exciting topics. I think we also have a great opportunity here to interact with academics. And without further ado, I think we would like to start with one of the most respected academics in the field, Professor Wolfgang Kleinwachter, who's an emeritus professor of the University of Aarhus, also a commissioner in the Global Commission on Stability in Cyberspace, has been working since many, many years on internet governance and on next generation internet, testified in hearings in the Deutsche Bundestag in the European Parliament, has been publishing a lot of real authority in the field, who we greatly respect. So Wolfgang, I give you the floor first for about 10 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Paul, and also thank you, Lorenzo, for making this arrangement in difficult times. So while face-to-face conferences are essential, so the virtual meetings are really a very, very good substitute, and it makes it also easier to avoid travel and to have presentations and discussions from your home office. So I want to speak about two issues. One is global governance and the other one is digital sovereignty and global governance with regard to cybersecurity. We heard this morning a lot about the European efforts to strengthen cybersecurity and what are the needed regulation and policies to enhance security and what are the technical options. But I think it's clear for all of us that there will be no European cybersecurity. That means while certainly Europe has to make a huge contribution and has to produce also what we call best practice to the rest of the world, but in an interdependent, interconnected world, So there will be no European cybersecurity if there is no global cybersecurity. So that means it's a challenge for Europe to look beyond the 27 member states and to say what we can contribute on the global level. And if you compare the situation today with the situation we had 10 or 15 years ago when the United Nations organized the World Summit on the Information Society, cybersecurity has become now an issue on the global diplomacy front. And we have, meanwhile, a number of platforms and intergovernmental negotiation processes where governments try to define legal frameworks, how to enhance cybersecurity. There are, in particular, two groups in the General Assembly of the United Nations. One was initiated already many years ago, and it's the so-called Group of Governmental Experts. And the other one was recently initiated by Russia. It's called the Open-Ended Working Group. And both groups are dealing with norms and principles for state behavior in cyberspace, which means, how to define exactly legal rights and duties so that the risks we have discussed also this morning can be reduced, that the cyberspace becomes a battlefield and will be undermined by malicious activities, not only by cyber criminals. I think this was the main focus this morning, but also by states. That means we have now the challenge that not only some bad guys, individuals trying to make money. So this is now part of the international conflict. And as you have seen from a number of issues, I think since the Stuxnet virus, we have seen an ongoing number of cases where governments, in a covered form or in a very open form, try to do things in other countries. So this is part of now of the international conflict scene. So what they are discussing in these two groups is, how international law applies to the cyberspace, and this brings us also to the question of cyber sovereignty, because sovereignty of states is a fundamental principles of the Charter of the United Nations, and I will come back to this issue a little bit later. And this brings us also back to issues like non-interference, peaceful settlement of disputes, and things like that. And there are a number of open questions, how to manage this. Because if you agree that the principle of the that no force should be used, the threat and use of force is forbidden under international law, and then you define a cyber attack as a form of the use of force. That means if this cyber attack of a government violates Article 2.4 of the Charter of the United Nations, then you trigger Article 51 of the Charter of the United Nations. That means the right of self-defense. So that means, and then you have the problem of hacking back on an international level, and then you start a cyber war. So I think this is a complex issue, because the question of attribution becomes very crucial here. That means if you say, okay, I'm attacked as a state, and you have a right to reply in referring to Article 51 of the Charter of the United Nations, then it has to be very clear. So that means if a plane bombs your city, I think this is very clear an attack, and you have deaths and destruction as a result of an attack. But a cyber attack it's very special, and it's very difficult to contribute. And very often the aim of a cyber attack on the international level is not death and destructions, it's chaos and confusion. So that means you come with a very difficult situation to define exactly, what is a cyber attack, and then, how international law applies. So on the agenda of these groups are also issues like confidence building, so that more a soft issue that you say, okay, if we can build trust among states, probably this will help how to deal with this new threat to become, and we are faced here with an international conflict. You have also capacity building on the agenda of these groups, because a lot of diplomats and policymakers do not understand the complexity of the digital age. And insofar, there's really a need to train the policymakers, and that lawmakers also understand better what the code makers are doing. And you need an enhanced collaboration and communication among lawmakers and code makers. And in particular, the last session about AI made very clear that means if policymakers, if lawmakers do not understand the complexity of AI, so they have a problem then doing the right policies and drafting the right regulatory frameworks. So I think this is about the global governance challenges, while this was a challenge mainly for internet governance, was mainly seen as a technical issue 15 or 20 years ago. It's now really a political issue on the international scene. And insofar, European policies have to take this into consideration, that they do not live on an isolated island of 27 member states. They live in this global interconnected world. And insofar, there's also a risk that Europe becomes pulled into a tech war between China and the US. So let's wait and see, what the new administration will do. I think the Trump administration, with his so-called Clean Network Initiative, provoked really a new layer in the international conflict. China reacted with the Global Data Security Initiative, and insofar, we are confronted here with a huge Chinese-American conflict, and Europe has to find its way. I think von der Leyen was very clear, saying, we will not go back to the old times. Europe is now much more sovereign and will have to talk to the Americans first, because we share our values, but we are here in a very difficult situation. And this brings me to the final point, which is some remarks about the issue of cyber sovereignty. I think Paul mentioned that already, that it's easy to call for digital sovereignty, but difficult to define, what is it exactly. From an international law perspective, so it's one of the 7 Hughes-Kogan's principles of the Charter of the United Nations, and it means mainly the sovereignty of states. And insofar, it could become slippery territory. That means if you put the concept of cyber sovereignty first, as the president of China, Xi Jinping, said it already a couple of years ago at the Wuhan Internet Conference, then this can be easily used as a principle to justify censorship, protectionism, and a lot of other things. If you have an understanding of an absolute cyber sovereignty. Insofar, if you use the language of digital sovereignty, you have to be very clear what you mean. So the sovereign use of technology is, I think, at the center of what the Europeans want to have. So they want to be sovereign in their decision, but for them, cyber sovereignty or digital sovereignty doesn't mean censorship or protectionism. So as some speakers have said also yesterday, we have to find the right balance on, keeping freedom on the one hand, but, also protecting our interests. So, and that's not easy to find the right balance. By the way, from an international law perspective, one of the 7 principles is the principle of self-determination. And so I would personally prefer, also from an academic perspective, to make more use of the language that we are looking for digital self-determination instead of sovereignty, because sovereignty can be easily misunderstood in the sense I have described it. And digital self-determination is more precise what we have in mind. With these final remarks, I give it back to Paul. Thank you very much, and sorry for being a little bit too long.
Thank you. No problem, Wolfgang. It's a pleasure to listen to you, and there are also such interesting ideas like the last one that you mentioned about the principle of self-determination, which could be at state level and at individual level applied. I hope we can come back to these issues to all the participants. If you want to pose a question or a comment, use the chat, and we'll try to come back to that at the end of the session after the speaker. So we go now to the second speaker, Elettra Ronchi, the head of data governance and the privacy unit in the OECD Digital Economy and Policy Division, where she's coordinating work on trust, data governance and risk management in the digital economy. Elettra has a long experience in the field of digital policy, going back to 1993 in the United Nations, but I've also had the pleasure to meet her in the context of her work in the European, in the OECD when I was still in the European Commission. And I think she may have some news for us. So Elettra, we are very keen to listen to you. Another 10 minutes for you. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Paul. I hope you hear me. I think I'm going to stop the video because it seems a little, unstable. So many thanks. It's really a pleasure to be here. I'm sure we will bring many different angles to this discussion because, as we just heard, these are very difficult concepts. But as all of the speakers throughout these 2 days have highlighted, it's clear that data has emerged as a powerful driver, a new resource, and this is only but intensified with artificial intelligence. But unlocking the global data economy requires, first of all, trust in the activities of the different players operating in the global data ecosystem, and the ability to scale economic and social activities globally. Individuals not engage with businesses they do not trust, and businesses will struggle to reap the benefits of scale unless they can operate globally. And so the challenges for governments is to create this environment of trust where regulatory objectives can be met, and this even when data is moved across jurisdictions. And we've called this recently data flows with trust. This is a term that was coined by Japan at the 2019 G20 under the former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe and has become now a shared priority for all G20 countries. But this requires addressing multiple issues. I realize that this is a conference focused on cybersecurity, but data flows with trust requires privacy, cybersecurity, digital trade arrangements, national security, digital industrial policies. And there's also the issue of increased siloing of data and data monopolies, especially as we just heard, it's creating tensions between the US and Chinese, as we just heard. Global governance of data ecosystems must address the increasing influence and market power on the part of those who control data, fair participation on the part of those who contribute to data generation. Now, at the OECD, we have a long track record in addressing data governance in the digital environment. Can you still hear me? Because I suddenly see a...
Yes, you are still good, Elettra.
Okay,
At least
sure.
I hear you, so go ahead.
Sure, okay. It's difficult when you don't see anybody and you're...
Oh, it's a feedback channel, yeah.
Yeah. So what I was saying is that at the OECD, we have a long track record in addressing data governance in the digital environment and setting the conditions for trust in transborder data flows and for enhancing access and sharing of data. And this has been a long-standing preoccupation in the last few years at the OECD. And if anything, it has been given an increased impetus by the G20 discussions on data flows with trust, as well as by the COVID crisis. But to date, I think it's fair to say it has proven challenging to get international discussion on ways to bridge the very different positions on these issues, and for a number of reasons. And I will now focus on a few of these reasons. First, a major emphasis of our work at the OECD under the Going Digital project has been to evaluate governance frameworks, policies, and regulations are fit for purpose, given the digital transformation. And it is increasingly apparent that digital technologies challenge deeply the way governments regulate, challenging enforcement, transcending administrative and jurisdictional boundaries, domestically and internationally. And the reason is that regulatory frameworks lack the agility to accommodate the increasingly rapid pace of technological developments. the workshop on governance innovation a year ago, which highlighted that there is a need for well-adapted and regulatory policies and governance approaches to help reconcile the tension between regulatory goals and innovation. And evidence, as is also highlighted in our recently published Digital Economy Outlook report, suggests that regulatory uncertainty is growing. Which brings me to this following point. I think many trust challenges in transborder data flows center around uncertainties on the interoperability of privacy and data protection frameworks. The past years have seen a number of significant regulatory developments worldwide. At a national level, an increasing number of countries around the world are putting in place or revising their data protection and privacy frameworks. Many governments have also been introducing and modifying data-related policies, introducing national data strategies to adapt them to new technological developments and place conditions on the transfer of data across borders or requiring the data be stored locally. So one key development that has influenced this trend is clearly the European General Data Protection Regulation. Now, although practically all OECD countries today are parties to at least one multilateral agreement or legal framework that defines or overcomes these restrictions on transborder flows of personal data, the uncertainties around the various legal bases for data transfers have persisted. And more recently, the Schrems II judgment has injected greater uncertainty as it has far-reaching consequences on all legal tools used to transfer personal data from the European Economic Area to any third country, including transfers between public authorities. Now, there is another trend recently that is affecting global data governance, and this is the increasing trend of data localization. Data localization has become for OECD countries the fourth most highly rated challenge to transborder data flows after uncertainty regarding legal privacy regimes. There are a number of reasons for the increasing trend. In some cases, requirements for data to be stored locally is the online equivalent of a longstanding practice in the offline world of ensuring that information is readily accessible to regulators. These measures can be sector-specific, reflecting particular regulatory requirements and targeting specific data such as health data. For example, Australia's My Health Record Act 2012 requires health records data to be stored and processed exclusively within Australia. Similar data localization measures are emerging in other countries and even beyond. In relation to health records, we know the same is emerging in the United Arab Emirates, in India, in China. So measures related to national security or cybersecurity also often mandate that data be stored and processed locally. Now, data localization industrial policies, including in the context of economic development. Now, it has become and it has emerged as a major issue as it contributes to uncertainty regarding legal privacy regime. It creates also a landscape of incompatibility of legal regimes, and it certainly adds to the time and resources required for legal compliance. It can impose prohibitively high compliance and entry costs. Evidence shows that these requirements also hamper economic growth in the countries that impose them and can undo the gains harnessed from digitalization. Now, to date, it has proven challenging to promote international discussions that breach these very different positions of countries in these sensitive issues. So going forward, a differentiated and balanced data governance approach is needed. Understanding the diversity of data and moving away from a binary concept of closed data and open data, but rather thinking of data sharing across a continuum with different risk benefits trade-offs is an important first step in helping identify and advance approaches for greater interoperability and or convergence between existing domestic and national regimes, helping economies meet the dual goal of ensuring that data can flow across borders with trust. Now, more differentiated approaches also to data sharing and a more effective governance of the associated risk is also needed in order to enable trust and encourage data sharing across society. Our work at the OECD on enhancing access and sharing of data has uncovered the growing need for data governance frameworks that incorporate a whole of government approach and are coherent across areas, sectors, and ideally countries. And this is reflected in the wide range also of data sharing approaches, mechanisms, communities, and agreements that have emerged and are emerging to improve access and sharing of data nationally, regionally, internationally, and that could become the building blocks of global data governance approaches and schemes. And I think we hear much more, particularly around what has just emerged in Europe, and I think it is a very interesting but also very hopeful set of developments. So I'll leave it there for the time being. Thank you.
Excellent, Elettra. And I think, again, here you also raise some really challenging points for discussion of how to increase that trust. And we can come back to that, hopefully. Then I would like to ask Pierre Chastanet to take the floor. A bit of a change in the program here, as Corina has asked to be last. Pierre is the head of unit for the cloud and software unit at the European Commission DG Connect, and in particular he's in charge of the development and the implementation of cloud policies, has a wide experience within the European Commission, has been for me also always a great pleasure to work with Pierre, and holds an eminent experience in the combination between technology, economy and policy. So Pierre, over to you for 10 minutes.
Okay, good morning, Paul, and good morning, colleagues. I will try to start my video. Hope the WebEx is not going to crash on me. Yeah, it seems to be working okay, yes.
Yeah, you are good.
Okay, perfect. So following the more global perspective that we have heard so far, I will take a more European stance to the data governance narrative there. It has really been at the heart of this commission to really put data at the center of the European digital policy. We see that data is going to be an essential element that will fuel artificial intelligence, that will fuel the development of novel industrial and commercial services. Therefore, it has really been a top priority for the Commission to create a single market for data in order to make the EU more competitive globally. We see that a proper functioning single market for data in Europe will enable innovative processes, products and services to develop in Europe. So industrial and commercial data are really the key driver of the digital economy. And this is why the Commission at the beginning of this year put forward the European data strategy, which was one of the very first communication to be adopted by the College on digital aspect. So this strategy aims at making more data available for use in the European economy and our society, while keeping those who generate the data in control. And I think this is an important element of differentiation. Europe really wants to develop its data economy according to its values. So that's very much reflected in our approach to create a single market for data. And we are starting from a very solid legislative framework in Europe, which is probably the best legislative framework that exists in the world in that respect. We have some of the strongest data protection and data security mechanism that exist out there. So the general data protection regulation, of course, but also the free flow of non-personal data regulation that guarantee that any form of data can flow within the European Union and across sectors for the benefit of all sectors of the economy. On the cybersecurity side, we have the NIS Network Information Security Directive, which is currently under review, as well as the Cybersecurity Act. So we have a very strong combination in the European rules of the privacy and data protection aspect, as well as the security, cybersecurity aspect. Conversely, we also want to make sure that competition law is fully respected. So we really want to create a dynamic market around data. So in sense, we saw that there was a need to further intervene in that space, notably to be able to stimulate access, use and reuse and sharing of data in a way where the rules are fair, practical and clear for everybody. So the EU really wants to become an attractive, secure and dynamic data economy by setting these clear and fair rules on access and reuse of data, but also by stimulating investment in the next generation of standards, of tools, of infrastructure to store and process data. And we see really the need at European level to create this virtuous cycle that exists between demand for data and the supply of data processing infrastructure and services. And this is really this virtuous cycle that we're trying to get started in Europe. So we, for that purpose, we're trying to join forces in European cloud capacity by creating a federation of European cloud capacity, so interconnecting capacities that are currently very scattered across Europe, and also offering in an open and transparent manner novel data services via marketplaces. So that notion is quite important. Because we want to make sure that we are promoting data services that are meeting the requirement that I mentioned with respect to data protection, with respect to cybersecurity, but also with respect to environmental performance, which is also the other big priority for this commission beside digital. So we want to promote data services, data infrastructures that are green, that are energy efficient. And finally, that are competitive in the sense that they are really enabling user industries to easily port their data from one service provider to the other. So the type of practices that we have identified of vendor blocking that exists quite significantly today in the market should really be overcome. So we want to promote the data services that are really open to data portability and that will facilitate interoperability of data services. The next aspect is the willingness at European level to pool data. So I mentioned we want to stimulate data sharing. And in that respect, we see the opportunity that different players from the same ecosystem start sharing data amongst themselves in order to have a better functioning of their market. So in order to enable this, we will need to have European-wide common and interoperable data spaces so that the different actors of that ecosystem know what sort of data format, data structure they have to use to be able to pool their data with their competitors in a way that is that will generate more added value for the common goods. So the idea of this is very close to the Nobel Prize in economy, Jean Tirole, of the common good aspect. So this is very much geared into these theories. Finally, we want to keep user under control. So for that purpose, we see a gap between, let's say, the theory and the practice. And we see that the new tools will be required to enable users, so citizens, but also industries, to remain in control of the data that they are sharing. So it means to have proper metadata management, to have tools to manage the control and access rights over time on the data that they have been sharing. But there's also a need to have skilled people to be able to master the different tools, technologies that are associated with these different systems. So very recently, the Commission has adopted the first piece of legislation. So this is the European Data Governance Act. So this is a first milestone in the direction that I've just explained, which is setting up a new European way of data governance. So we believe that this will facilitate and stimulate data sharing within industrial sectors and across sectors and member states. And it will create a lot of wealth for the European society while providing this degree of control for citizens and companies to trust this mechanism of data sharing. This can really generate an enormous economic impact. Our colleagues from OECD have done absolutely great analysis on this, and within the OECD economy, they have measured that data access, data reuse could generate economic benefit of 1 to 2.5% of GDP. So this is really a great potential to recover from the current crisis as well.
Wrap up.
Yes, sure. So the EU will want to boost the development of trustworthy data sharing system. Here we have put a first landmark with this legislative proposal on European data governance, and there will be more to come, both on an investment and further policy to continue stimulating this trustworthy data sharing in the EU. Thank you.
Thank you, Pierre. And if we have a chance, we might come back to the Data Governance Act and actually hear perhaps from Elettra whether that is a good example of an internationally a good example of a trust-creating data sharing framework. Our final speaker here, contribution will be from Corinna Schulze. Corinna is from SAP. She is the global policy. Sorry, I have to make sure that I pronounce her title correctly. EU Government Affairs at SAP, one of our largest companies actually in the field in Europe, has herself also a long experience in leading public policy matters for SAP in the digital economy, data protection, cybersecurity, also export controls, quite interesting, Corinna, and has been very active always in policy and public policy promotion in European policies. And before joining SAP, she has actually also worked at the European Commission. So she has also some experience from
Corinna, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. I was cut off for a second, so I also cut my video because I think it's a bandwidth problem here. Can you hear me now?
Yes, very well, thanks.
Okay, well, first of all, many thanks for having me, and many thanks for the kind introduction, Paul. I wanted to start with picking up again on the definition of the term digital sovereignty. We actually believe that there is still a need to clarify that in the debate, as it means many things to different people. I have to say that I really liked the definition that Professor Kleinwächter used, so I'm going to pick up on that very spontaneously. The idea of a digital self-determination, because for us as well, the term digital sovereignty leans a little bit towards protectionism and a protectionist attitude. And while we think that the idea of being digitally independent is very, very important for countries, for us, obviously, the notion of having this protectionist touch is a bit worrisome. So I have to say, I like very much the idea of digital self-determination, because it really moves into the right direction. And it leans also very much on a definition or a term we know from data protection, which is the informational self-determination. So I have to say, I found that very interesting, and this is certainly also the direction we would like it to take. That it's really about being able to determine your own digital fate, if you will, without becoming a protectionist. So why is this important? And I'm going to explain it a little bit from the perspective of a private company. Why is this important? This debate so important for us? It matters because we don't only see the EU and the member states as a market, and of course for us this is a big market and a very important market, or just saying that we see the public sector as a potential customer. That remains of course important. But for us as an EU company headquartered in Germany, the EU always was and has to remain an important geopolitical player. It has to remain an economic powerhouse, because otherwise, also for us, this would be an erosion. And as we already mentioned throughout the company, the conference, we would often find ourselves squeezed between the US and China. And I can tell you, also from a company perspective, it's a very uncomfortable position to be in. So. But looking at how can we go about ensuring this, and I will call it again, digital self-determination going forward. So what we've experienced at an EU level is that the first answer to that was regulation. And regulation as such is certainly not bad, and is certainly a way to go about it. But of course, it should not be the only way to try and foster this digital self-determination. Elettra mentioned already in the area of data governance what was happening recently. This is certainly an area which is very, very important for us. That not only around the globe you see attempts to data localization, that many of the bigger countries around the globe are now insisting that data is hosted in country and it couldn't be processed elsewhere. But we also have obviously seen at the EU level with the Schrems II decision and the recommendations from the European Data Protection Board, but also now the new standard contractual clauses from the European Commission for data transfers, an attempt to get more of a grip on data flows. While this is as such not that worrisome to us, because we have always agreed on the fact that when it comes to the data protection standards that you have in the EU, we absolutely accept that the data has to be protected while traveling. So the tools that were provided or are provided today under the GDPR are absolutely acceptable for us. We still see a tendency now after Schrems II, but also, as I said, the recommendations from the EDPB. Even a stronger focus on industry, also to try and control what is and make sure that we're absolutely aware of what's happening around the globe, what's happening in third countries, what is happening with law enforcement and national security provisions in the countries you might want to transfer your data in. And that is certainly a new notion for us, and that I know many companies and many industries are trying to get their heads around. So that's clearly a new challenge, and we also see that we see more burden put on industry, also really to move into the geopolitical game and understand what is happening in as I said, other countries in terms of law enforcement and national security, and that's certainly a new game for us. In this debate, what is important for us is that companies can usually handle a sound data protection regime and regulation, but we shouldn't forget also in the debate with now about data transfers that not all data is the same, and not all data processing is the same, and not all the data transfers are the same. So we really need and try to find a pragmatic solution there. And we believe in the overall debate, we should apply a risk-based approach also in there. Paul, you tell me if am I running out of time already?
One more minute, okay?
Okay, 1 more minute. Okay, I quickly wanted to say that the same applies, for example, on the debate for AI. There it is clearly more difficult for companies in the EU to collect data, to process data, because we have, as I mentioned before, a very sound data protection regime. But still, we need to find a balance there if we don't just the consumer and users of technologies developed elsewhere. And certainly there's no interest for us to just bring over algorithms that were trained on data sets we had no control of. So to come to conclusions, I think in this overall debate, it is first of all necessary to still clarify the concept. We should absolutely avoid overregulation or conflicting regulation. That is very problematic for industry. And in this whole debate, very important, apply a risk-based approach, address these challenges, but without becoming becoming protectionist ourselves. I stop here, Paul.
Sorry. Yeah, thank you very much, Corina. You end on something that is also of great interest, I think, for all of us, which is this geopolitical dimension, and that companies get pulled into that. And that's perhaps also part of the answer to one of the questions that is posed by Theresa Fallon, I think. So what I want to do is, I said actually for the participants, I said in advance to this panel that I would like to focus on the hard choices that have to be made, the difficult things that difficult choices that have to be made for a degree of digital sovereignty in the EU to become a reality, and also uncomfortable positions that perhaps the EU has to take in global governance. So let me pick up on the questions that you have posed and put them a little bit into that perspective. For example, Cosmina Mogior posed an interesting question. Who should exercise digital sovereignty? Is it the individual member states or the EU as a grand organization? Or perhaps you could even say none of those. And if you're interested, I recently wrote a blog about it, that I think we even need to look for sovereignty again at the EU treaties. Now, I think there's a question for Wolfgang. Wolfgang, if you would say, where is it going to hurt, but it should happen that national governments in Europe give up some of this self-determination or sovereignty, and perhaps also the EU in the greater common good interest gives up some of its strive for sovereignty. Where is it going to be painful, and what should happen in your view?
We know the internet governance ecosystem is a multi-layered system. So it depends on which layer you are operating. If you are operating on the global layer, I think it makes no sense that individual European countries try to strengthen their own sovereignty. So that means on the global level, it needs a united Europe. So that means if Europe wants to become a norm maker and not a norm taker. So they have to be united and have to negotiate norms on a global level with the other two superpowers, with the United States and China. Certainly, there are differences with the United States and China. So we share the same values with the United States, but we have a different value system with China. But China is a partner. And insofar, this was also a question in the chat, whether the Clean Network initiative is a good one or a bad one. I personally, certainly, politicians can make everything, but there's a high price if you want to decouple an interdependent economy. So decoupling has really a high price, and insofar you have to have a very sophisticated and very specific reply to the challenges. Just to kick out other big partners will not give the solution. So that means then probably you overstretch your sovereignty by ignoring the reality of the world. So that means you have to find a clever solution, also now with the new administration, where you continue, on a value base, an enhanced cooperation, and at the same time, make clear that China is a partner, and you cannot kick it out. A digital fortress looks like the Iron Curtain, and that's not a good idea.
Of course, to a degree, you give here a diplomatic answer because China has a different value system, but is also a partner, which I think many of us in our head try to square how that fits together. But let's move to other kind of tensions that exist. If we talk about values, there are also not only, but of a completely different nature. If you take China and the infringements on human rights that they do is, of course, of a completely different sphere in terms of values. But also lots of people that say, well, I'm feeling uncomfortable with the global platforms. And to some extent, there is a question to that I translate a little bit on the chat about, and this is for Pierre, if we are talking about the European cloud policy, can we then actually live with the dominance of global cloud players that also try to take part in that? Isn't it that we should learn from the past that Europe has been naive and has been too open, and perhaps we do need a degree of protectionism? So can you do a European cloud without having a degree of protectionism? Pierre, what's your view on that?
I think that's absolutely not the willingness of the EU to start becoming protectionist and or apply protectionist competition or industrial policies. On the contrary, I think there is willingness to reintroduce a certain degree of competition in a market that has largely become oligopolistic and which is actually detrimental to European user industries. So it means that, in this sort of oligopolistic market, we know very well economically what happens. Eventually, the price will rise, and that will be detrimental to the good development of the European data economy. So I think this is also from this perspective we have to take it. There are natural interdependencies between Europe and the rest of the world. We're not trying to completely alleviate ourselves from those dependencies. But it's important to keep a very competitive European data market. Otherwise, user companies will not trust the platform on which they could share the data. So the different mechanism that we're trying to put in place really cannot work if there is not that trust element.
Yeah, but Pierre, this is what we have said in the past, also always about things like social media, about security, about even about data protection. We intend to have the best and the best regulation. And if you look in economic sense, the data protection business is mainly captured by American companies, as a matter of fact. So isn't it so that we also need to have measures that are really Europe first measures for those that are the weaker parties and that we want to promote in Europe?
Well, we will undertake some of those measures, but in a way that remains compliant with competition and trade policies, to which the EU remains fully committed. So we can adhere to these policies while indeed redeveloping competition via investment in European technology, European players.
Yeah. That also brings us to the Data Governance Act, I think, and that's more a question for Elettra. So the Data Governance Act may be one of those examples that does perhaps what Pierre says. It leaves the global possibilities open, but doesn't forget about Europe. Is in your view, is the Data Governance Act, as far as you have had the chance to see it, because of course it's only 2 weeks old, is that a good example of a global data governance framework, or would you wish to see something different? Elettra, are you with us?
Yes, I am. So you said it right. It's very recent, but indeed it holds a lot of promise, and it goes back to also what Karina was saying. That is, it takes account of the fact that not all data is the same. We need to really move away from binary concepts of closed data and open data. Think at data as a continuum, and particularly focus on some of the key points where we can move ahead. And I would like to and four did really strike me as going in the right direction. The first is to put in place mechanisms for the enhanced use of public sector data that cannot be available as open data, because what we found in our own work is that the majority of policy actions have gone toward opening data. But as I just said, we have some difficulties and barriers in accessing data that we need to, has creates concerns for a number of legitimate rights, be it privacy, but also intellectual property rights and other business rights. So there needs to be some mechanism in place. The second is a focus on data intermediaries, and data intermediaries is an essential mechanism in place that many countries have utilized in order to facilitate access and sharing. And we've seen across, in a number of countries, these data intermediaries can act as either certification authorities, or even the public sector can facilitate by designating trusted data sharing platforms. So this focus on simplifying and creating greater certainty around the role of data intermediaries seems very good, and also measures around data altruism. I find very interesting, because we're talking more and more about enhancing platforms for data cooperation, where you also find data cooperatives of individuals who can have greater control on how they share and they provide their own data. So I think all in all, it looks very promising, frankly. The only thing is that, as we say, the devil is in the detail. So we have to see how it's going to be put in practice.
And I'm also, but well, let me, if we have still a minute time, I will pick up on this point in the context of what Karina said about large companies that perhaps don't want it are also unavoidably pulled into this geopolitical battle. And so, Karina, I mean, if push comes to shove, you get now this kind of document has been reported in the Financial Times about an alliance between the US and Europe against China. How, as a global company, do you deal with this type of tension? Do you create fora that perhaps you can discuss with Wolfgang that are operating at the international level, that are going beyond and above this kind of geopolitical battle, and where this type of trust is built up that Elettra is talking about? So, Karina, how does a company like SAP deal with this?
Yeah, thanks, Paul. First of all, one thing you have to keep in mind as a global player, we are bound by national and even local legislation, right? There is no way that you can, if something was implemented at a Chinese level or the US applies their export control rules, you have to somehow find a way to comply, right? That's the first point.
But you can also decide not to work in those countries that have this type of legislation.
Yeah, good. But then you're not a global player, right? That hinders you in being a global player. But having said that, we obviously work with different think tanks and, as you said, different associations to make sure that the dialogue remains open and that ideally there are not, as I said, the geopolitical heavyweights of this world fighting against each other, and that there is a way to find some common ground without being naive. Some of the challenges, the threats are out there, and they cannot be just dismissed and disregarded. But usually, we as a company would work with international associations, indeed, in order to, bring up the business perspective and try to, create bridges and find common ground.
Yeah, that seems to me a very good answer. Also to bridge, perhaps as a final word, to Wolfgang. Wolfgang, if you see this kind of interest also of large companies and who unavoidably struggle with not only their global interest, but also the global common good, do you see that there are new opportunities to work with companies and to work with also the civil society at international level, opportunities that perhaps do not get caught into this perhaps geopolitical stalemate that may appear?
Yeah, the whole internet is based on a multi-stakeholder approach. That means if you are pulled into an intergovernmental battle, everybody will be a loser. And insofar, to listen, I think that's really a good recommendation to governments, let's say on both sides of the Pacific and both sides on the Atlantic, to listen to the non-state actors from the technical community, from the civil society, and also from the business. And I think if business and users and technical community go together, they have an impact on governmental policies and can bring them, to the more or less universal values. Because I think there are no big differences among interests of users around the globe, and business, as we have just heard, have also the same interests. So it's the challenge for the policymakers to find the right compromises. It's a big challenge. It's not easy to do, in particular, if you have strategic interests, if it's this interwoven with military issues and other issues, but that's the only way forward. So that means we do not have an alternative than to find compromises. And I hope that the new constellation now on the global level will allow us to stumble forward. So there is no easy solution for this.
Yeah. I think this is a very wise answer. I mean, John Perry Barlow once said that in the internet world, governments, you have no place. You have to be out of that. Perhaps it's rather you do have a place there, and all these other players also have to be present. There is only one way forward, which is that you discuss there about what is in the global interest. And this is too important to fall victim to, let's say, narrow interest, to narrow forms of looking at the digital society. I think this, for me, it was a very interesting panel. I hope that the participants also liked it, and you had a number of very good questions. We couldn't deal with everything, but there are very pertinent questions there that I hope the panelists can also reflect on and get answers on. A debate that will go on. Grateful to CEPS to having organized this, Lorenzo, to having given us the possibility here to exchange. And once again, many thanks to the panelists. And I hand back to Lorenzo.
Thank you very much, Paul, for chairing. And I think we couldn't have a better conclusions, of this summit. Wolfgang made very clear that, in this difficult moment for the world, for the economics, and we need to listen to the non-state actors. So, the NGO, civil society. So CEPS has a particular role to play. This is what is a think tank about. And so we think that in these 2 days we have touched upon many hot topics, not offer solution, but at least started the discussion, and this will continue with our activity in the coming months and next year. Therefore, I would like to take this opportunity, first of all, to thank all the participants, the speakers, our sponsor that made this possible, also my colleagues Carolina Polito and also Xavier Xadid that support in the background all this big machine. And I want to mention some further initiative that CEPS has on the pipeline. First of all, in a couple of weeks, on the 14th and 15th of December, we will host a very important international event, the WAIS 2020, the workshop on economic information security. This is it's a state-of-art meeting on where computer scientists, privacy experts, economists talk about the economics of security. I mean, one of the reasons for having at the CEPS this initiative on cybersecurity exactly to foster the idea that cybersecurity is not just a technical issue. It's need to be, it's an economic, political, and also behavioral issue, and so require a very holistic approach to be solved. So if you didn't register yet, on the 14th, go on the website of CEPS, also WAIS 2020, and you can register there. Then in January we'll have the presentation one report of the task force on AI and cybersecurity, and then we are about to launch, and as probably you know, we have been working with the Commission on the study on the NIS review, and I think we will want to contribute to this debate. We launch an ad hoc forum on the NIS review to be able, to offer CEPS platform the discussion of the legislative initiative will come out. Thank you very much to everybody again, and have a nice lunch. It's time to go have a lunch. Okay, thank you very much.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you.